Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Agay with your host Warisa Zainab. Victims of domestic violence or domestic abuse, if they are men, they are not taken seriously. They are often treated as a joke or something which is non serious. Male victims of abuse or violence are often ignored, not taken seriously, and this is the main reason why they often choose to remain silent and they don't speak out. Lots of people who are in a position like this, who are currently in an abusive relationship or have escaped an abusive relationship, choose to not report it to the police or any social services, or don't even confide to their friends and family members out of fear of being judged, made fun of, or just ignored. It is a serious issue and it affects lots of people around the globe. Statistics are shockingly high, and during the pandemic, we have seen an alarming rate of increase in domestic abuse cases amongst men. People often automatically assume that a man cannot be abused because they are perceived as the stronger sex, as somebody who is well capable of protecting themselves. But unfortunately, sometimes this is not the case. There is emotional manipulation and neglect and many other forms of coercive control that does destroy lives. Today is a very special episode because this is the month of October, and October is associated with Domestic Abuse Awareness Month. We have invited three amazing guests from this organization working actively in the UK to help victims and survivors of domestic abuse. We have three special guests from Break the Silence UK, an organization that is working round the clock to support the survivors and victims. Today with us, we have Lee, who is the CEO, and he is an amazing person who has not only utilized his life experiences to establish an amazing organization like this, but he has also written an amazing book on the subject that is being used across many parts of UK to teach people about coercive control and domestic abuse against men. We also have Josh Munro on the show, who is also the director of this fantastic organization. Welcome to the show, Josh.
Hi, thank you.
And we have Amy Peoples, who is also the director of Break the Silence UK, and she is also a criminologist by profession. So, to our esteemed guest, a very warm welcome to Agay.
Thank you.
Hey, thank you very much for having us.
An honor. So, Lee, I'll start with you because you are the CEO. If you could tell our audience what inspired you to establish an organization like this. Do you feel there was a need? Was there anything that was lacking in UK when it comes to supporting male victims?
Absolutely. There are agencies out there, and there have always been agencies out there to support male victims, but it's very limited. I myself used to work in the area that I live, supporting male victims of abuse. And it was just me for the whole county, which was very, very difficult. I left that role and I went into work in substance misuse, which is another passion of mine. But it became very, very apparent still that there was a lot of domestic abuse going on that was coming to the forefront in that field as well. And people were asking me about it because of my experience. It was only really when we watched the BBC documentary Abused by My Girlfriend that was on, which was the story of Alex Skeel, who was a high profile male victim that actually got me quite upset and got me thinking, things haven't changed over these years that I've been doing this. What can I do differently? Which led to writing a book, which both Josh and Amy were involved in the process all the way through. With an aim really, if we help one person, that was an achievement for us, but it was so much bigger, which led to us firstly creating our website and our organization, and we've just gone from strength to strength there in terms of what we do supporting victim survivors, but also what we do to educate professionals and anybody else that's interested in learning more about the field of domestic abuse.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that. Before we go further into this topic, I would like our audience to watch this clip that has been produced by Break the Silence UK to raise awareness about the issue and educate the audience. So we'll join you after this short clip. Stay tuned.
It's estimated that every year over 2.5 million people in the UK from various backgrounds will experience domestic abuse.
During the global pandemic that has gripped the world over the last year, call centres providing support saw a dramatic rise in cases of between 80 and 150%.
Victims of every type of abuse, trapped within the walls of their homes with no way to escape their abuser.
This needs to stop. It's time to lift the lid on the true extent of domestic abuse.
We at Break the Silence UK say no more.
No more will we stand by and watch whilst innocent victims continue to suffer at the hands of their abuser.
We at Break the Silence UK offer an inclusive service to all victims and survivors that access our support.
We support women, we support men, regardless of gender or sexual orientation. If you are a victim of domestic abuse, we are here for you.
Through our one-to-one support.
Through our structured programmes.
Through our advocacy work and training for professionals.
Through helping you in any way that we can.
We at Break the Silence UK do care and we will support you.
If you need help, access our website at www.breakthesilenceuk.co.uk.
Let us help you break your silence.
Welcome back to Agahi. That was a short clip from Break the Silence UK. Coming back to our esteemed guests in this amazing panel that we have today on the show. Coming back to you, Amy, you've studied criminology, and people often don't understand that hitting someone, controlling someone, abusing in any way or form is a crime in this country. And when it comes to relationships, intimate partner relationships, people often ignore certain signs and red flags. I want you to share your thoughts on the statistics when it comes to male victims of domestic abuse and how it is a crime.
Male victims, from my experience, tend to have the same what's the word? They suffer the same types of abuse as women. It doesn't appear from what we've seen that men suffer any different to women. They're just less likely to come forward.
Right.
So, I mean, we try not to compare because when you look into it, the types of abuse are comparable. So the coercion and control, the violence, the love bombing. So, and often like playing like the victim, making a victim feel sorry for them. So it's part of manipulation. Using children within the coercion and control so they stay, financial abuse, emotional abuse. It's all very, very similar. I mean, with the case that Lee was talking about with Alex, that was that was horrendous. But sadly not in isolation of just the only case that we've heard of that, of happening to. It's it's poignant. It's just people, it's just men, I think, with regard to how society is today, don't speak up, and we want to try and break those barriers so they feel comfortable in speaking to anybody, just to sort of wave that white flag and say, I'm being abused, help me. There's no shame in that at all.
Yeah. Josh, why do you feel when it comes to cases of male victims of domestic abuse and survivors, why are cases underreported? What prevents people from coming forward and opening up or sharing what they're going through with the right support agencies?
So, well, even with support agencies, there are limitations on what they can provide because in a previous organisation I worked for as an independent domestic violence advisor, my
Hmm.
caseload was primarily women because there wasn't enough funding for me to solely work with male victims because not many in that county were coming forward.
Hmm.
In terms of barriers for men, again, as Amy said, they are very similar in terms of being falsely accused of actually being the perpetrator. Had negative experience with the police. We've had clients that have been, in essence, laughed out of the police office, and it's not the best way to actually encourage people to do that because they're not being taken seriously. They
Yeah.
can also fear loss of custody of their children, loss of their family, loss of their livelihood,
Yes.
especially, in and around those factors, as well as
Mm.
potential homelessness. Because again, the sense of being able to look after yourself and then have
Yeah.
everyone you know and love turn to you and say, what, what do you mean she's hitting you? Why is that an issue? When in fact,
Mm.
uh, the deep psychological and emotional abuse that can take place, where you are slowly being chipped away at day after day after day,
Yeah.
doesn't have to be, I say, a major physical blowout for that to be incredibly traumatic. I mean, if you have been broken
Yes.
down over the case
Mm.
of 10, 15, 20 years or more in cases I've had
Yeah.
myself, that person becomes a shell and they are not able to see the light. And for us to be able to help that person,
Mm.
so like we have, let's say, our clients in the past, um, gives us great fulfillment, and we want to help anyone and everyone we can.
Yeah. Yeah. Amy raised a really important point that there is no difference amongst both the genders or all genders across. Because the way we perceive the issue of domestic abuse is like it only happens to women. Men don't get hit. And maybe that's why a lot of men don't come forward because sometimes the abuse is more psychological, like manipulation and coercive control, and they don't identify it as a problem, and only when escalates and it starts to kind of threaten their well-being, then only they realize that this is an issue. Is this the case, Lee? Sorry, I think you're on mute. We can't hear you.
Is my microphone playing up again?
I can hear you now.
Intermittent sound. I swear it's one of my
Yes.
colleagues cutting me off so I don't talk.
All right,
um,
that's absolutely.
I think it's pretty split down the middle because we do get situations where there's a lot of coercion, there's a lot of emotional, a lot of psychological stuff going on where men just don't sort of attribute those behaviours to being domestic abuse. I
Hmm.
mean, talking about my own personal experience, I had no idea whatsoever that I was a victim of abuse. I took part in a male program that we were running in Worcestershire. I was asked to come and help facilitate it, and it was an interesting topic for me because when they said, it's a group for male victims of domestic abuse, again, my
Hmm.
first thought was, what? Females are victims of domestic abuse, not men. So it was
Yeah.
kind of a new topic for me. So I went along, and the gentleman that was originally running that course said to me, look, the best way for you to learn is to join in. And what they looked at was the gender neutral version of what's known as the power and control wheel, which looks at behaviors and tactics that are used by perpetrators. And And I was watching these men ticking off these behaviors that they'd faced themselves within their relationships. Now, the chap that was facilitating it, he said, Lee, join in. It's the best way. Come on, just tick the boxes, see if anything comes to you. So I started with children because I thought that's nice and easy, because me and my ex-partner didn't have children. So that was a complete blank section. And I was thinking, that's okay. But then when I moved on to the other section, it then became tick after tick after tick after tick. And I felt as though my whole world just fell out from underneath me, because I got out of that relationship. I was in a new relationship by this point, but I'd never considered that I'd been a victim. And also the impact of that relationship on future relationships, and the ability to be able to trust other people, to be able to fully open up to other people. You know, I do still sometimes find myself quite guarded now, purely and simply because of some of those behaviors I face. But I think there is the other side to it, that, you know, it is perceived that there's not so much physical abuse when it comes to male victims. But that, again, is incorrect. You know, there's lots of evidence, there's lots of academic research that's been done in this field that shows that certainly for men who suffer physical abuse, it's more likely that that perpetrator will use weapons against them. You know, we've come across situations of scalding water, drinks being used as a weapon. You know, I talk to other agencies that I know, and certainly stories I hear, it really makes you upset. You know, men being stabbed in the leg, screwdrivers, and saying, "Oh, I had an accident, I slipped at work." You know, I think the most prominent case for me was a case that I worked once, where a gentleman was found by an ambulance under a walkway, a passover, with a 12-inch stiletto heel sticking out of his chest, where he'd had a deal with his perpetrator, and she'd taken off her shoe and hit him so hard that this heel was stuck in his chest. He had to have life-saving surgery, but still didn't want to pursue things further, because he said, "I love her. She's not always like this."
Amy, how come these things, these incidents don't become headlines? How come these incidents of crime never become breaking news in the media?
Well, it's because it's not, you know, people see domestic abuse as gendered, don't they, against women? I suppose it's not what the media want to really kind of publicize, maybe. Unless it's a really kind of high risk case, that there's no and also I suppose as well, if it is you know, publicized that there is an issue, then it will then be publicized and looked into a bit more, and seen that it is highly underfunded. And, you know, when an issue's raised, then the government has to do a bit more to help. And I suppose with everything going on, probably not wanting to put funding into something that actually is really, really needed.
Yeah. Josh, when you come across these cases, what do you think? What kind of pattern do you see that most men kind of experience, or things that they tend to ignore when it becomes like really, really serious?
Generally, from the client base that I've had, the patterns that I have seen is that they haven't. They generally don't see it as abuse, because they've been raised in an environment where that's how relationships are formed, relationships are maintained, and that's just something you put up with. And very, very old school framing of, you know, happy wife, happy life, and oh, you know, I'm just getting a bit of grief. That's, you know, that's a relationship, when in fact, they are either being physically, emotionally, financially abused. I've had clients where they, you know, so they've gone to work, earn their money, so they come back home, and they've been left with £100 or less to last them the month, whilst being expected to ferry the kids around, pay for things and everything else. whilst she has, I say, everything else at her disposal. So the fact that they don't see how that affects them is generally quite shocking, because it kind of springs to mind. So, you don't know unless you're in it, sort of thing. But even when you're in it, you can't always see, and your family members can't always see. The way relationships are taught to us from influences from our family, influences from school, friendship, and how we're sort of left to fend for ourselves in that sense. And because we want to connect, we are social beings. We do want to like have families and all of this. So it does sort of put them in a trap, to be fair.
I mean, we've spoke about it, haven't we? Is a team, and when you're looking at how they come up with the figures on domestic abuse, it's you're looking at questions around domestic violence, and as we've talked about already, it's not just about violence, and we've taken a huge step forward, moving it to being addressed as domestic abuse. But when you talk about men's experiences of going to the police, as we've talked about already, my colleagues have already talked about the lack of service provision that there is out there. You're asking questions. Has your partner or family member ever displayed a behaviour that made you consider going to the police? Well, when you're reading everything online and you're reading about all different men's experiences that have gone to the police and it's been negative, the answer is always going to be no. So when we're talking about an average of 754,000 men estimated, that's a conservative guess. We've changed the way that we structure talking to men about their experiences, certainly when it comes to talk to us. And we talk about, certainly in a way of saying, do you know what, talk to me. Has your partner or family member ever displayed a behaviour that made you feel uncomfortable? If that's the case, let's explore this a little bit, because it opens up so many doors. Because as soon as you start talking about, have they done something that made you want to go to the police, a lot of people become very guarded. Now, that's male and female because of the potential risk that is there. But just open it up in a general conversation and saying, do you know what? If they've done something that makes you feel uncomfortable, talk to me about it. It allows you to explore so much more and makes people open up so much more. We need to change the questions being asked.
Yeah. I mean, it's all right someone saying, oh, are you a victim of domestic abuse? Most people are going to, they're going to turn around and say, no, I'm not, because they're not recognising that the behaviours that are being displayed towards them are abuse, especially if they've grown up with that, that cycle of abuse, especially if they've seen their parent display those behaviours in a relationship. They're going to see that whole kind of scenarios as normal, and that's the kind of, especially with men, in society, that's where people aren't coming forward and realising that abuse, is abuse, basically.
So when we look at stats, they say 1 out of every 3 or like they experience some form of domestic abuse in their lifetime. Is that true? Is that underreported or overreported?
It all depends on where you look. In different places across the globe, we've seen 1 in 3 women, 1 in 4 men, 1 in 3 women, 1 in 6 men. We've also seen down as far as 1 in 2 women, 1 in 3 men. There are some people that would argue that it's very 50-50. There's some organisations that have done some extensive research and said, actually, when you talk to police about this and it's off the record, they will say it's very, very split down the middle. So we believe it's quite underreported. And we will never truly know the true extent. And I think the danger is that when you start looking at stats when they're estimated, this is where you get the message being put out into society. Domestic abuse is a gendered crime. It's not a gender crime. How can anyone say it's gendered when you're looking at an estimated just shy of a million men in the UK alone each year, and that's estimated. How is that a minority victim group? It's not.
Yeah.
And there's
that is a shocking statistic.
It's very shocking. And when you take gender out of it and look at different types of abuse, there are that's where confusion can lie as well. I mean, there's so many theories out there, but when you take gender out of it and look at sort of situational couple violence, intimate terrorist role, you know, the role when someone's basically, you know, giving something back sort of thing after years of abuse, you know, there does tend to be statistics then for that. But again, because someone's taken gender out of it, those statistics aren't really readily available for those different types, and that's where there needs to be more research. And then I think that, you know, the grounds would probably become a lot more even. I just think that there's a lot more to it, and because it is such a gendered crime at the moment, the way it's looked at, through sort of prevalence of it isn't actually you know, being shown, and so the statistics are never going to in my opinion be accurate until that's done.
Yeah. Josh, you mentioned something about homelessness amongst men. And I think this is an area which is pretty much ignored. So, for example, 1 or 2 people out of every 200 in the UK are practically homeless. But nobody tries to find out the reason why they become homeless. And in cases of abuse where intimate partner relationships is coercive control and, you know, any form of abuse, why do you think this is the case? Because, you know, there's this stereotype, you may call it, or a stigma or misconception that men are known as the ones who are the providers or the ones who control the finances. So what makes them reach this stage where they lose control over finances and somebody else is in so much control that they literally kick them out of the house and make them homeless?
It generally starts very slowly.
I've got banging on my office door, so if just excuse me 1 minute is always the way.
Absolutely fine. Josh will answer that meanwhile.
Hey, no worries. So yeah, it generally starts very slowly, where they will, you know, start asking for money for groceries or for the children, or to help them because their pay is short this month, you know, and then they're expected to pay for dinners out. They're expected to help family members that are in financial binds on that side. And it gets to a point where they see that they now have basically forfeited their entire monthly wage and are left with breadcrumbs to last them, but they can be brainwashed into seeing that you know, that they are providing, you know, I provide the roof over the head, I'm, you know, putting food on the table, all these sorts of things. But in terms of homelessness, it can arise when, say, if there are children in the home, the male will tend to remove themselves because they don't want to put their children either in where they're not living in the home, where they are in a refuge, or they're living with family, making it a bit more difficult for them to be seen.
Right.
So it can make things difficult. I mean, especially since if they are in a service, that would take 4% of men that are generally supported, so like by local agencies. There are like 39 organisations, like 238 refuge spaces, but only like 58 of those are actually dedicated to men, because the rest can accommodate overflow in female refugees. Because again, having worked in that sector as well, it's needed because there aren't any refuge spaces, or there are hardly any for everyone. Everybody is struggling. Everybody needs that provision. But say even with like those 58 dedicated beds, that father could end up. I said, well, I say it's not enough, but they could end up the other side of the country, making it difficult to find work, live off benefits, have access to the children. They can no longer bond with them or take them to school. If they then have to go, say, like via a contact centre, abuse can continue there, as well as if any contact was made online via FaceTime or via Zoom or Skype or any of those sorts of mediums, that can still be controlled by the perpetrator. That can be minimized to a point where out of the couple of hours that they're supposed to have, they only have half an hour, 20 minutes because of unexpected delays, or they're out shopping, or they're busy doing other things, or they're seeing other family members. So that it does make things incredibly complicated, and so yeah, makes it quite clear why some men say, well, find it easier to take themselves out of the home because they may have been broken down so much that they see themselves as the issue, or say, oh, I didn't love her enough, I didn't provide enough, I don't have a good enough job, I'm say not a good enough father to the children, which is not the case.
Yeah. Lee, sorry, you're on mute again. If you unmute, will be. Go on.
No, nothing yet.
I also wanted to know if one of you could answer, how common is it to see men taking injunction against a female perpetrator? Because we often hear of stories where a female has escaped an abusive relationship and she feels threatened that her life is in danger, so she has gone to the police or the social services and went for injunction so that there is no contact. What about male victims? Sorry, Lee, we can't hear you. Maybe George.
Yeah. So, well, in terms of injunctions, yeah, of course. In terms of injunctions, they are accessible to men, but again, there are barriers in place, and it makes things quite hard for them to be obtained. Whereas when I've had to get them for female victims and any female victim that has needed either a restraining order, prohibited steps orders, or any sort of provision, can be a point of, oh yeah, we can get you an emergency appointment within the next couple of hours, hang around court in the morning and we can squeeze you in and get it done. I've not had that experience with a male victim as of yet. Even when I was supporting male victims in in a court setting, even seeing other professionals and whether that be solicitors, magistrates, there's not a lot of grasp on how it can be an issue, and just sort of like think, well, you've removed yourself from the property, there isn't an issue anymore, where in fact it is, because he's still being harassed when he's at work, or when he's being harassed say outside of work, at home with family, or say if he's gone to live with parents or something, just to make ends meet so he can still stay close enough to see the children.
That's another thing. I've read about many cases, many incidents where the female perpetrator has taken the custody of the children, or is manipulating her partner, saying that she will take the custody, or she'll take the child away, and the male victim is unable to see his kids, to have any form of contact, and that's another tool of manipulation that is used against them if they dare to stand.
I say, as well as her actually putting out injunctions on him. So she has used the system against him to make it even harder for him to see his children and to heal from all of the harm that's happened. And it's just sort of prolonging say, the abuse through the system.
Yeah. How common is psychological control, psychological manipulation? Because we know that there are different forms and different types of abuse that exists. And we see patterns of certain types of abuse more prevalent amongst female victims. But what about male victims of abuse? What are they subjected to frequently? Is it sexual, financial, psychological, or physical? Sorry, Lee, I think maybe you've turned off your mic.
Oh
No,
no.
we still. Do you want to
No,
log out
so
and log back in? Do you think that would help? Yeah, let's do that. Okay. Amy, would you like to answer that meanwhile?
Yeah, what was the question again? Sorry.
I just wanted to know, there are different types of abuse. There's physical, psychological, sexual, financial, spiritual. Which type is more prevalent or more seen amongst male victims? What are they subjected to frequently?
All of it, to be fair. Like I said before, the similarities between men and women as victims are second to none, really. They're very, very, very similar. So the coercion and control would be the same as for a woman. Kids are used. Maybe mental illness would be used. Money, emotional abuse. There can be sort of put downs with in relation to like personal sort of put downs in relation to personal kind of areas. Just different just different ways of trying to just make that person feel inadequate and small and that they mean nothing. It happens with women, it happens with men. It's just the same across the board. It's quite scary, actually, how similar it is with regards to like with violence
bullying.
as well. Bullying,
as well, especially in older relationships as well, in terms of if say any partner is disabled or infirm or is in need of medication, whether that be for a physical ailment or even things like Alzheimer's, mental health issues. All of these things can be made to make that person feel like a burden, completely useless, and being degraded by, in such a way by someone that say that you love and that you hold dear can really deteriorate a person.
Especially as they're meant to be there as perhaps named as their carer, which then puts that victim in an even more vulnerable position. It's quite scary when you actually look at the kind of facts of it all. It's very scary.
Yeah, I'm hoping my microphone is back working now.
It's working perfectly.
Brilliant. I mean, when you're looking at it, it's there's a lot of similarities in, as my colleagues have said, in some of the behaviours. But just to throw a few out there that seem to be quite common. Certainly, looking at financial and economic abuse. We've seen male victims being harassed by their perpetrator whilst they're at work, and certainly, as we've already sort of alluded to, once their money comes in, it goes into the household, and then they aren't allowed any money of their own. So they're going to work, they're providing, but
this is a live calling show, and I encourage people to call in if they have any questions or if they want to share their experiences, because it's really difficult for a man to talk about experiences like these. But you've been very brave. You've written a big book about your experiences, and it's benefiting so many people.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mix. Some of the experiences there are my own. Some of them are clients that we've worked with, sort of sharing everybody's experiences with their permission. Because one of the things became very apparent, I mean, all of us here either have or are in the process of doing our master's degree in understanding domestic and sexual violence. And there's not a lot of material out there in terms of, looking at males as victims. When you find a lot of material, it's talking about males as perpetrators. And I think when you've constantly got that message being delivered out there, why would anyone want to come forward? You know, when you read about domestic abuse, why would men want to come forward when they're asked questions like, well, what did you do to make her do that? You know,
Exactly.
it's victim blaming on a whole nother level. It's very much saying, well, hang on a minute. What do you mean you're a victim of domestic abuse? But the problem we've got is until people stand up, talk about their stories, and actually start asking for help, this situation's not going to change. A lot of people have spoke to me and my colleagues about the subject of toxic masculinity being a reason behind perpetration of domestic abuse, certainly in terms of male perpetrators. But that toxic masculinity, in a way, can also be looked at as a reason for why men don't speak out. Certainly some of the beliefs in society around what men are supposed to be, certainly around some of the things that, you know, we've had men tell us that their perpetrators have said to them, you know, things along the lines of, if you were a real man, you wouldn't put up with this lifestyle. If you were a real man, you'd be able to provide for your family better. You know, when you've got that constant type of manipulation and putting you down going on, you start to question yourself. You start to believe some of the things that are said, because
there's a lot of gaslighting going on as well.
Absolutely, gaslighting is massive. We talk to men that start to question their mental health. Now, I myself have been subjected to that. Certainly, one of the things that I've talked about in the book is a story of when a gentleman was coming home from work and putting his keys in a bowl because he was quite forgetful, and he would lose his keys. That was me. And what was happening is I was going to go out and go into the bowl and the keys weren't there. So I was then retracing my steps around the house, trying to find them, going back, and then the keys were there in the bowl. And it was like, I swear they weren't there. And this went on for some time, and I really started to question my own sanity. To the point it became quite worrying for me, until I caught her out one day. I was adamant that I'd done it, and I was watching over the banister of the house, and I saw her put the keys back in, and I went down and I picked them up out the bowl and said, did you just put the keys back in the bowl because they weren't there a minute ago? And she said, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And I said, I just saw you do it. And the response I got was, look, I know how bad your mental health's been recently. I know how forgetful you've been getting. I saw them on the table, and I didn't want you to feel that, you know, this was an issue. So I put them there, but I've never done it before. And, you know, this is something that happens so much. And there's so many men that, you know, have had these issues where they're really questioning their whole existence. And what I'd say to people is, if this is happening to you, speak out, because what happens is it's the same with anybody. It affects your mental health. When you affect your mental health, you're going into lots of different areas there. We know that suicide rates are highest within men. Yeah. We know from statistics from other agencies that men that have talked about being victims of domestic abuse, 11% have attempted suicide. But how many have actually gone the full extent and are no longer with us because of the extent of the abuse that they've suffered? I believe it's extremely high, and that is never talked about.
Lee, I want you to give some more examples from your personal life. When did you reach that point in your life, when that moment of realization where you thought, okay, this is it, I'm going to leave, this person is not going to change? How did that happen? How did you reach that point?
It happened before I even realized that I was being subjected to domestic abuse. There was lots of stuff that went on within the relationship, stuff that was turned back on myself to make me feel guilty. One of the things that sticks with me an awful lot is having that suspicion that something was going on, knowing that there, you know, potentially there was something going on behind my back, with somebody else, little comments that have been made to other people. But every time I try to broach the subject, it was like, you're paranoid. You know, there was a situation where a family member had quite a serious operation, and I was worried. You know, I'm a genuine person. I worry about people. And my ex-partner was asleep on the sofa. She did have some issues with alcohol, and her phone kept going off. And my concern was that, I hope something hasn't happened to this family member. So because it kept going off, I tried to wake her, couldn't wake her, so I checked the phone because I needed to know whether it was something that had happened. And what I was confronted with was a whole stream of explicit text messages that had been passed between her and her ex-boss, who I'd heard lots of rumours about, something going on between them. By this point, obviously, things were a little bit too late because I'd already been put in a position where I had taken on a lot of financial burden from the household, in terms of her running up debts and me reconsolidating into my name. And when the conversation came about that all this stuff was coming to light, it all turned on me. And how dare you look at my phone? How dare you invade my privacy? Which I then started blaming myself for. But, you know, I checked because I was concerned about a family member. You know, how dare you put me in this position? It's your fault. You lead me to drink with your behavior.
Projecting everything on you. Projecting everything on you.
You know what? And the saddest thing is, like so many men, I accepted it. And, you know, I took this as being my fault. And it's only later on down the line when somebody actually explained to me, this is what domestic abuse is. Sorry, I'm getting a little bit emotional talking about this.
That's okay.
And
thank you so much for sharing this. Lee, if you could just show your book if it's nearby, so that if any person watching this program right now is interested to learn more, then they know exactly what book to go for and where to get it from. Because our aim is to spread awareness.
Yeah, we've only got the original version to show at the moment, which is this book here. This was originally on Amazon. Now, it's not on Amazon at the moment because we have just last year secured a publishing deal with a major UK publisher who has publishing houses right around the globe. So they have 4 different publishing houses. It is being released into mainstream bookstores and onto Amazon on the 30th of November. So literally in a month's time, it's going to be back out there in the new format, all updated. We look at all the different types of abuse. We look at help that should be available in terms of laws. We give guidance on, you know, being able to access children and the court process there, as well as looking at things like disabilities and how they're used. There's literally something for everybody. We've had victims, survivors, we've had professionals, we've had family members all coming out and saying, this has helped. There are organisations that are using this as sort of a blueprint model for the support that they're giving men as well. So, you know, as I said before, if it helps just one person, it's amazing. Course, but we just hope.
Our job is done.
The biggest hope is that when someone reads this, if someone thinks, do you know what, there are behaviours in my relationship that just don't feel right to me, I feel uncomfortable with the way they treat me, that maybe they'll give this a read. Maybe they'll look at it. They'll look at the behaviours and the experiences suffered by other men and realise, do you know what? And I say this to men because we're talking about men, but this goes to any victim of domestic abuse. You are not alone. Speak up, talk to people, talk to us. You know, there's ways that you can contact us through our website and someone will always answer. You don't have to suffer this abuse in silence.
Thank you so much for that. Any final message from you, Amy, before we end this show?
Similar to Lee, you know, any victim, you're not alone. You know, we're 3 very experienced personally and academically. We've all worked within the sector. Confidentiality is paramount. anytime, just drop the line, and we're happy to help anybody.
Exactly. Domestic abuse is a human issue as well. Saying nor does it discriminate no matter your race, gender, religion, age, or class. We're all here to help. We want to help. And if we can, we will.
Thank you so much. And for
Thank you
all
for having
the
me.
people who are, it was an absolute honor. And all the people who are watching right now, if you have any questions that you would like to ask Josh, Lee, or Amy personally, privately, you can visit their website, breakthesilenceuk.co.uk. Am I right?
Yes.
And you can contact them. And Lee's book is also available out there if you would like to have a read, because often we don't understand that we are in an abusive relationship until we see someone else in a similar situation and suffering the same way that we are, and then only we realize, okay, this is wrong. And our guests gave some brilliant examples today of what being in an intimate partner abusive relationship looks like. Amy mentioned about coercive control, manipulation. Lee gave examples as well. The forms of abuse, for example, financial, psychological, sexual, spiritual, even. So, if you are currently a victim, do not feel ashamed. Don't blame yourself. Seek help. Help is out there. You can reach out to Break the Silence UK. You can call our studio number, and we'll pass on the contact details of our amazing guest today. Once again, thank you so much, Josh, Lee, and
Thank you
Amy,
very much.
for taking the time.
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
That she
And
had
to
no
all our
money
viewers,
and she had 3 children.
So before we end the show, I just wanted to say that look after yourself, especially your mental health. And next Saturday, we'll see you again with another amazing guest and a topic related to your well-being and mental health. Till then, take care. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi.